This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Assessing and Addressing the Needs of Young Children with Disabilities Through Telecommunication. I'm so excited to bring you this webinar with the Council for Exceptional Children and the Division for Early Childhood. My name is Megan Shea. I'm on the staff of CEC, and I'll be helping moderate today's webinar. I would like to introduce our presenters for today, Robin McWilliam and Cami Stevenson. With that, I'm going to turn it over to them, and please enjoy the webinar.
Thank you very much. And we're very grateful to DEC and CEC for giving us this opportunity to help support the professionals in early childhood who are in turn supporting families. So I'll introduce myself, and then Cami, I'll let you introduce yourself. I'm Robin McWilliam. I'm a professor at the University of Alabama, where I have founded the Evidence-Based International Early Intervention Office, which comes to EIEIO, perfect for young childhood. And I've been working in the field for a long time, and especially in studying and training people to provide family-centered services. And little did I ever think that this information would be so critical as it is in this current environment. Okay, Cami, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Cami Stevenson. I'm an administrator at the Multnomah Early Childhood Program in Portland, Oregon. We serve at our program children 0 birth to 5 years old, all with special needs, and we have over 3,000 families in our program. So I'm very excited to be here with you. And I also play a part with Robin as far as working through his certification institutes. So thank you for having us.
Yes, and so those are our individual introductions. And as Cami said, we also come as a pair. So it turns out that we're in considerable demand right now. We did a webinar yesterday for primarily for Australia that was attended by 800 people. What Cami brings to this is, in addition to her intelligence and good nature and so forth, is that she knows the model really well, and she has the practical, hands-on experience of training staff to implement the routines-based model and supervising them and helping them, supporting them as they're negotiating things in this new environment. So Alexander Graham Bell said, in this experiment made on the 9th of October, 1876, actual conversation backwards and forwards upon the same line and by the same instruments reciprocally used was successfully carried on for the first time upon a real line of miles in length. Alexander Graham Bell, by the way, was a Scotsman who then became an American, just like me. And the importance of conversation in the work that we're going to talk about today is paramount. And it just as well, since we obviously are not face-to-face with families. And so this actual conversation that we have, whether it is face-to-face or online, is we converse with each other to establish, maintain, and strengthen relationships. And that importance about relationships, of course, continues when we're doing telepractice or whatever you want to call this virtual work that we're doing. We also, in the routines-based model, use conversation to assess needs. And as you'll see a bit later on, that's really important because the ability to assess needs remains even if we're not able to test children, for example. As I say, we'll come back to that. And we use conversation to provide supports to people. And you'll see that this conversation that we can have through technology will be able to support families. I want to give you here an overview of the routines-based model. One area of the routines-based model is needs assessment and planning. And that consists of the development of an eco map, the routines-based interview, writing participation-based child goals and writing family goals. And this can all be transferred, this information can be transferred onto a matrix. We endorse and promote the use of a primary service provider. And in places where that is impossible because of lack of cooperation of other providers, we have developed something called the comprehensive service provider. The primary service provider then makes routines-based visits. For many children, those visits are to homes. We also have routines-based visits to classrooms when classrooms are in operation. And this is an international model, and so there are some countries where the services are provided in clinics, and we've figured out how to make a visit by the family to a clinic or office routines-based also. Now, what happens after those visits is that now the caregiver is actually doing the interventions. And so this model is all about caregiver implemented interventions, which results in, and here are our outcomes now, family confidence, as well as goal attainment by the child and the family for that matter. And when children achieve their goals, their engagement, independence, and social relationships in routines improves. We'll talk about the measure that we use for that and how we can use that also virtually. And family confidence is one of the components that leads to family quality of life. So these outcomes are always in our minds as we are providing these other resources and services. So how the principles of the routines-based model match the demands of distance service delivery is where we're going to go from here on out. But I did want to pause at this point to ask, since Cami, your program serves a lot of children, and now a lot of children in a very different way, because many of the children you guys have been serving were in community classroom programs. How are you supporting families in your program?
So as Robin was mentioning, the model really is emphasizing caregiving mediation. And the three different types of support that we give the caregivers are emotional, material, and informational support. And so I just want to briefly talk about what those mean to us as well as families. And that is really where we're focusing our time and attention to in our visits, especially with everything going on. Emotional support has been really important. Robin likes to teach us about it in the by starting with profs, and that is PROFS. So we're the first one is being positive. This is a challenging time for a lot of families trying to balance work, other children in the home, spouses working at home. And so being positive and staying positive about both the child as well as the family is really important, and just focusing on what is going well and supporting those things that are coming up. We want to make sure that we're responsive to the entire family, not just the child that we are serving. We know that if something happens in the family with one child, the whole family, or a parent, the whole family is affected. So we want to make sure that we are checking in and being orientated to the whole family. And then we want to also make sure just overall friendliness. We might be feeling stressed, and so we be coming across as not as our typical self that we show up at work. We want to make sure that we're still staying positive as well as sensitive. Again, we don't know what's going on in each other's houses, the stresses that we might be under. And so just being able to be sensitive and thoughtful of what another family is going through. The other type of support that we provide are general materials. And so that is translated for us right now as just basic material, just basic resources for families. Some families are needing things such as, where do I go for a food box? Or we don't have internet. Do you have any resources for that? We've even have frontline workers looking for different childcare options. So right now we're really focusing on just helping families find some of those resources. We often say in the model, we whip out the eco map to support some of these things, support families that are needing, meaning that we look at the family's informal supports before we slap on another service for something. And so we want to be aware that informal supports might not be as available right now because we can't call up the neighbor to come over and sit with the kids while we run to the grocery store or to that effect. So we have to be aware of that we might be being some of those informal supports right now. And then lastly, usually our visits really do result in a lot of informational support because that is where interventions fall under. And so sometimes we are providing information support in the terms of what is the child supposed to be doing right now, or what comes next, and there are resources regarding services or information about a disability, and then like I mentioned, overall overall interventions as well as things to do with the child during this time. So those are the three things that we're really focusing on in our program.
Thank you, Cami. That's that's one of the bedrocks of this approach, is the provision of emotional, material, and informational support. So thank you for that reminder, and I'm glad that's what you guys are focusing on. This table shows some of the principles of the routines-based model and how tele-intervention or telepractice is applied to carrying out the principles. So the first principle, probably the one that is mentioned the most frequently, is that all the intervention occurs between visits. These principles have always been in place in our model, and so once we are helping families digitally or through other forms of technology, the visits, that is the time we get on the computer with them or the phone with them, build the family's capacity to meet child and family's needs. So we understand, as we have always understood, that the purpose of the visit is to build family capacity. A second principle is the family sets the agenda. This has become especially important because there is a lot of guidance out there right now about how to do telepractice in early intervention and early childhood special education. And some of that guidance makes it sound as though the professionals are getting themselves organized and then they're going to come in with their agenda when they get on screen or on the phone. And in our model, we have the next steps form, which we'll show you a bit later on. And it is virtually completed. So by talking to the family, we can plan for the next visit and review what we did on the current visit. It doesn't require being face-to-face to do that. Cami, I think, how do you think the next steps form has changed your providers' home visits?
The next steps form is just fantastic. It really has helped guide our visits. It's really simple to fill out. We can place updates on the child or family progress and data right on the form, so that's kind of a nice running record for us to refer back to. It's an easy way to document for us to be able to share with families. We can take a picture of it if we're writing it on paper. We can scan it, or we can even do it electronically and email it directly to families. It kind of helps cement the plan for the week, so both parties know what we're going to come back to talk about for the next visit. Again, it kind of helps the provider know, okay, was there something that I was supposed to follow through on? And that's a nice place for them to refer back to. And like I mentioned, it's a great place to start on your next visit. So you don't have to come up with, like Robin said, there's no need to prepare for the visit other than following through with anything you'd recommended or that you would said you would follow through on.
Yeah, so I was actually looking around. I don't think we have a copy of the next steps form on this slide. Is that your recollection also, Cami? I mean, on this PowerPoint?
Oh, we have a blank one, I believe.
Okay, all right. We'll come back to that if necessary. A third principle then is that parents are competent adults, and we have to keep emphasizing this because sometimes professionals will confuse pedagogy with andragogy. Pedagogy is the teaching of children. Andragogy is adult learning theory. And so by constantly remembering that all parents, if they have custody of a child, then we treat them as competent adults. And so this means that when we're determining interventions that the parents are going to carry out by their choice, we collaborate to develop these interventions with them. We don't just give them strategies to use. We do suggest strategies in the process of coming up of collaborating with the family, but we don't give them homework, for example. It's what they choose to work on in between our visits. The fourth principle is family consultation is how we work with families. And so that's more or less what I was just talking about. Family consultation is collaborative consultation with families. So it's not the bad kind of consultation, which is expert consultation. It's working with families. So we ask many questions to help families arrive at solutions that they want to implement. By that, I don't mean that we just keep asking until the family finds a solution. We ask at least 4 questions, and then we might come up with a suggestion. But at least by having asked questions, our suggestions are likely to be based in context, things the families haven't already tried, and something that the family is interested in. So Cami, tell me how providers tend to go back to an expert consultation model.
It's really easy to do when everybody is stressed out. Those of us in early childhood, we know that we are helper bees, and we like to just be there and support and try to answer any questions. And sometimes that is, we hear a question and we have an answer that we're just dying to give, and so then it becomes the expert model. In early intervention, we want to be helping families lead as normal as a life as possible. So us providing interventions that might not be feasible or practical for the family to be carrying out right now isn't very helpful, despite how much we're trying to be helpful. And as Robin said, we want to come back to, well, who sets the agenda for the home visit anyway? We know that the parents are supposed to be the ones that are helping us help them. And so again, we're feeling a little stressed out too. And so sometimes we just have that thought of, well, just do what I'm telling you and everything will work out. Well, again, that's not building capacity within a family. As we know, as Robin was saying, adult learning theory, we need to build upon what they know and increase those areas of need.
Good. Yes, thank you. I have also seen the how easy it is for people to revert to an expert model, especially if that's how they were previously doing other visits. But it's, I think you put very eloquently the importance of really being collaborative in times of high stress and difficult situations. Thank you. So a big focus of this session is going to be needs assessment. And we talked to DEC and CEC about this because there's quite a lot of material available on how to do visits. And we will talk about that a little bit too, but not many people are talking about the assessment of real child and family needs, which has always been a hallmark of the routines-based model. So there are 4 main components to this. One is, I showed you those on that sort of flow chart showing the model. The eco map, the routines-based conversation, and you'll see why I changed the word from interview to conversation in a minute. Child and family outcomes or goals, and the writing of child and family outcomes or goals, and the development of a matrix. So in preparing for the routines-based conversation, now I'll address this terminology issue right now. The routines-based interview is an evidence-based process for assessing child and family needs and developing, helping the family choose, decide on what their goals are. And the people can be trained to fidelity on the RBI. Well, you can't get this kind of training to everybody very rapidly. The scaling up of training to fidelity on the RBI, and we're very, very concerned about fidelity. Scaling that up rapidly is impossible to do, of course. And so we can teach the elements of the routines-based interview, and people will be, we hope, doing their best to do a routines-based interview without having had the training to fidelity. And so that doesn't make it a real RBI. And so the routines, let's call it like this, the RBI by an untrained person is a routines-based conversation. It makes that distinction between fidelity and non-fidelity. So in preparing for the routines-based conversation, it's the same as we do with face-to-face RBIs or RBCs. So we tell them how long it's going to be. We tell them that it's a pretty intense conversation and that we don't need the child there. And if somebody else can look after the child at that time, that's great. If not, don't worry about it. And of course, in this situation that we are in now with shutdowns and shelter in place and so on, often there is nobody else available to watch the children. But if there is, this would be a nice time to get some respite from the child, but unfortunately you'll have to deal with us instead. And then the purpose of we tell the family what the purpose of the RBI is, or the routines-based conversation, and that is to end up with a list of functional child skills that the family would like the child to acquire, as well as family goals to help the family meet its own needs, or the individual adults or siblings to meet their needs too. So again, that's one of the differences between the routines-based model and some other approaches, is that everybody in the family is able to have goals for themselves. That, of course, is a true family-centered approach. So let's go back to the EcoMap. How do you develop an EcoMap, and why do we need one? Cami already gave you a clue about this, about knowing who the informal supports are when we're helping with families. So an EcoMap is a method to show we're interested in the family, not just the child. Children, after all, live in families. We need something to establish a friendly, interested relationship. It's the beginning of the routines-based conversation, which works marvelously to get a good relationship going. I actually want to address a question that sometimes people have. We had this question last night, actually, and that is, should you establish a relationship with the family first and then do the EcoMap and RBI? And the answer is no. Use the EcoMap and the RBI as a great way to kickstart the relationship. It's really hard to have a good routines-based conversation and not fall in love with the family, and reciprocally they fall in love with you. So the relationship gets going through the EcoMap and RBI or RBC. And we need an alternative to the checklist method of doing intakes. That isn't quite so relevant here, but sometimes people use the EcoMap at an intake visit. It is possible to do that. We often train people to do it at the beginning of the routines-based conversation. So the stated purpose that we use when we're talking to families, when we're introducing the idea that we're going to do an EcoMap, is like this. I'd like to find out about the people in your life so we know what supports you have and who might be able to meet the goals that you set. I'll ask you some questions and draw a picture we call an EcoMap. If there's anything you don't want to say, don't say it. Is this okay? It always is okay, so then we can proceed. And the first question is, who lives in the home with your child and you? And as we have a quick look at an EcoMap, you'll see why we begin that way. In this rather artificial looking eco map because it was typed out with very nice square boxes and so on. We see that who lives in, if let's say that we were talking to Sarah, the mother of Michelle, and we would ask who lives in the home with you and your child, and she would say my husband or partner or whatever, Kevin, lives with us. So it's 3 people in the home, and that's the first part of the eco map that you draw, is that middle part. And then you start asking about some of the other supports. I'll go through this in a minute, but the way we array supports on the eco map in our model is to have the informal supports across the top, the formal supports across the bottom, and the intermediate supports on the sides. And it's these informal supports that become really important. Interestingly, when we do eco maps with families who are already in early intervention, often the early interventionists would say, I didn't even know about all these people up here, because we tend to focus so much on the immediate family and maybe a grandmother who lives nearby or whatever, without understanding that there are other people. I'll show you some other another eco map in a second. So we ask about those living with the child. We do not ask who is the child's father or who is your husband or anything like that, because those assumptions, we can't make those kinds of assumptions. We ask about the mother's family or one parent's family, the other parent's family if there is another parent there, the neighbors and family friends, mother's friends. This is really important. The way I do it is I ask, who's your BFF? And the research is really clear that the supports that especially women have from their female friends is often very, very important to them. We ask about father's friends, worship friends. We do ask about their church, synagogue, mosque, temple attendance, because in the United States especially, this is a very religious country by people's claims of what they believe in and where they go on the relevant day of the week. And so it would be a mistake for us not to ask about religious observance. Work, we ask about work, and then professionals, people who are paid to be nice to the family, doctors, teachers, therapists, and then don't forget about financial agencies. And we try to remember also to ask about insurance now, and that might come up when talking about work, or we ask when we're inquiring about financial resources that the family has. And so for informal supports, our questions are not directly, how supportive is this person to you? So we get the family to identify the people, a person in their eco map, or it could be a couple, like the grandparents, for example, on the maternal grandparents. And instead of saying how supportive are they to you, we ask an indirect question, which often when you're doing interviews or even therapy, the indirect question is easier for the family to answer, and it serves as a proxy for the amount of support. So if you're talking about, let's say, the mother's parents, and she says, oh, I talk to her many times a day, then we would indicate that with a wide line, as I'll show you in a minute. If they say, oh, I only talk to them maybe once a month, then they're present, so they get a very thin line, as you'll see in a second. So that's what we ask about with informal supports. With some people, we might ask, how do you get along with them? And a good question to ask is, if something cool happened with one of your children, who would you call? With all of these questions, the important thing is to find out how supportive or stressful this person is. Do I have the, no, I didn't have the professional one. With professionals, we ask, how do you like this person? Not how good is she at occupational therapy or whatever the resources the person is providing, but how do you like her? And we base our the width of the lines on that answer. So here you see another messy one done on lined paper. So it's a real one. And so here's the family in the middle, and you can see in this family there were quite a few wide lines. This is to Kay's parents, it says up here. These are moderate lines here. This is to her sister. Here's an individual, just one line, Jay's father. So those are the 3 levels of support. And then you'll also notice some dashed lines. There's one to I think this is, this is the state insurance where this family lives. And there's another one which is to some services for an older child, actually. And dashed lines indicate a source of stress. Here's an interesting one because you can see that there are quite a few people on here, but I've indicated on this one, all of the out-of-town people are in the white boxes. And the people in town are all of these in pink or whatever this color is. And this child, Darcy, had mild global delays. But look at what her service array looks like. She has a physiatrist, SLP weekly at home. OT and PT are twice a week at the clinic and not on the same day. She has special instruction home visitor. She has a service coordinator. They have a service coordinator. And then these are some doctors here. Here's aquatic therapy, the doctors as needed. And so when we asked Krista, a very common question in the routines-based conversation, which are your hours from hell, or what's your worst time of the day? She said in the afternoons when she's with her kid, just her and Darcy. And I thought that was a very strange thing. That would seem like it might be one of the good times. And it was that she didn't really know how to play with her child. It was her first child. She doesn't have a lot of people around her in her informal network to learn from, like other parents, for example. And so this is a great example of where early intervention has just gone awry, because with all of these professionals, they've missed the boat completely. They haven't taught her how to enjoy her child. They're all doing their own individual therapies and instruction and so forth, based on who knows what. And because it certainly wasn't anything that was of great importance to Krista. She believed it was important, but they've missed the boat. And then the other issue is, she said that she wanted more friends. Well, why doesn't she have more friends? She's so busy taking her kid to various services or being home for them. So the eco map can sometimes reveal good and bad things that are happening with families. So it's a very useful tool to put into your toolkit. At the end of the eco map, we say, what do you think of this picture? Most parents say, that's a lot of people. And so we say, right, and we'll try not to complicate your life anymore, which is a hint about the fact that in our model, we're not just going to go slapping services on with every need that that arises. And then we say how we're going to use it. We'll use this eco map whenever possible to see if you already have people who can help with different goals you come up with. So a number of researchers have pointed out that an assets-based approach to early intervention is successful and should be the way we go. And so this is saying the families are coming to the table with these assets, these people who are already in their lives, who can contribute to this community and family-based way of supporting families. And nothing about this changes through telepractice. However, let me just get to this. There are some virtual implications when you are doing it virtually. Well, this is the routines-based, this is getting into the routines-based conversation. So let me just go back to the eco map for a second and say that if you're showing the family the eco map and you've been drawing it yourself while the family has been answering your questions, you have to have a way to show them the drawing so that they can look at it when you ask them, what does it look like? So you can take a picture of it and send it to them as an image, or just hold it up in front of the camera and let them look at it. Did we do the preparation for the RBC? Yeah. Cami, have I missed opportunities to ask you questions?
No.
Okay. So here are the main stages of the routines-based conversation. First, it begins by asking the family, what are your main concerns? So let's assume we have, this is a visit of some kind, so we have a connection. It could be with video or without video, and we ask, what are your main concerns? And we write those down and we say, okay, good, I'll ask you more about those as we go through the day. We then proceed through the day asking the family how their day goes, and we usually begin by asking, how does your day begin? We ask that of the adult. And they go through their day, and our questions within each routine. So a routine is a time of the day in our definition. We use time of the day with the family so as not to confuse them, not to make them think that it's about what is your routine, meaning the whole day long, or so as not to confuse them in thinking that we believe that every time of the day should be done in a routine fashion. Routine is time of day. So we go through these times of the days asking about engagement, independence, and social relationships. So you'll see that that is an important theme in this model. It's the way to dig deep and move box with parent to under your camera, look at camera, move box. I'm not sure what this means. I'll have to figure that one out. But what's important when you're interviewing the family and asking in-depth questions about the child's engagement, the child's independence, and the child's social relationships is make eye contact, like I'm doing with you right now, looking up into the camera. Of course, you then have to, you can take notes, or you can type. Now, usually when we do it face-to-face, we find typing doesn't work very well because of the awkwardness at the end where we're trying to share the notes, and it's sometimes hard to keep the notes formatted correctly as you're going along. But when you're doing it virtually, it might be more possible to do that. So you can either take handwritten notes or you can type notes. For some people, this is a relief because they like to type. So type or handwrite them. If type, try to limit the notes to concerns. In the routines-based conversation, we're not trying to capture everything that goes on. We are trying to capture what goes on in the routines, but we only need notes about things that are potentially things that might be worked on. And you'll see that when we get to the recap, you can see it down here, recap, that that's where we just go through the concerns that have come up. And so when typing, don't feel like, the point is not to get verbatim report down in your notes, because that's going to hang you up when you get down to the recap. When we get to the end of the day, or as far as we could go, because we'll have a conversation in a minute about the fact that the live RBI, that is face-to-face RBI, I should say, is 2 hours long. The phone or technology-based RBI might be shorter because of lots of environmental issues, and just because the communication, it isn't just like a regular communication, a conversation that one might have face-to-face. So anyway, when you get close to the end of the time allotted, you do ask the family the time, worry, and change questions, and they are, do you have enough time for yourself or yourself and another person? The worry question is, when you lie awake at night worrying, what do you worry about? And the change question is, if there's anything you could change in your life, what would it be? And so those are just questions, and so there's no need to change those just because we're doing it electronically. We then have the recap, and so it's really helpful for the family when you're doing the recap. That's the review of what we talked about around the concerns. It's really good if the family can see what it is, see your notes at the time that you're doing that. When we do it live, we actually hold the notes up and use our finger to go down through the concerns like that. So when you're doing it virtually, if you can share your screen, if you're using a technology basis that has share screening capability and the family can see it, that's a good time to do it. Or you can send notes. You can take pictures of your notes and send them to the family if that technology is available to them also. And after this recap, which only lasts 5 to 7 minutes, probably on the shorter side, because as I said, these conversations are likely to be shorter than a RBI done to Fidelity in face-to-face. So it's just short. It's just a quick reminder. Then the family makes decisions about what it is they want to work on. And the professional writes these down as the family makes their decisions. We sometimes have to ask for some clarifying information about what they really want so that we then are left in a position to write good goals. And so when we get to the end of their goals, and in face-to-face RBIs, we end up with 10 to 12 goals typically. For those of you working with infants and toddlers, you know, anytime I'm saying goals, you might call it outcomes where you work. So after these goals have been decided upon by the family, and we help them by letting them look at the notes so that reminds them of other things that were important to them, then they need to see the notes so that they can put the goals that they've chosen into order of priority of importance to them, because it's amazing that families can sometimes list a number of things, and then we keep encouraging them to think about more and more and more, and then lo and behold, some of the goals chosen near the end end up being the top goal, the most important one to them. That's one of the reasons we keep trying to get these longer list of goals than many people are used to. Also, interestingly, sometimes the things that they mention near the top end up being lower priority order for them. Where was engagement? The engagement, independence, and social relationships are the digging deeper that we talked about. I want to make the point that engagement is the manner and extent to which the child meaningfully participates in that time of the day. Engagement is defined as the amount of time a child spends interacting with adults, peers, or materials in a developmentally and contextually appropriate manner at different levels of competence. So engagement is participation. Independence, well, we know what independence is, but we also have to be culturally and individually sensitive with families, because not all families might expect independence in their child in the same way that you might, for example. Sorry, wrong way. I'm watching the time, so this PowerPoint will be available to participants later on, so you can go through some of these. Social relationships consist of communication and getting along with others. So you can see, how does the child communicate, respond to communication, express himself, how sophisticated is the child's communication, from very simple to using whole sentences, for example. What communication mode does the child use? So we need to know whether signing is involved or other alternative or augmented communication methods. And how easy is it for the child to be understood, recognizing that for all children under the age of 7, they're going to be making articulation errors, so it doesn't necessarily mean that there is something pathological going on. Getting along with others is the other component of social relationships, and so you can see the kinds of questions that we ask about the child's social relationships or getting along with others in this time of the day. So all of these EISR, engagement, independence, and social relationships, are done within the routine that the family said comes next in their day. So Cami, we know that digging deeper is important in an actual RBI with Fidelity. So how can we encourage people who are not yet trained to do an RBI to Fidelity to get enough information so families will be able to think about specific functional skills that they want their child to acquire? In other words, what do providers need to think about during the RBC?
So as you were mentioning, when we say digging deeper, that is meaning that we're a fly on the wall. What would we see? We want to be able to paint the picture, ask the questions for us to be able to understand exactly what is happening during that time of day. And you can see some of these questions almost look like standardized test questions. So we're getting at child functioning and participation in context instead of just some standardized tests that we're just going through in an artificial environment. So we want to make sure we're really thinking about how is the child participating in that time of day. We know routines are very topsy-turvy right now with what we might have thought was going on in the home. Now there's new people in the environment. There might be new needs in the environment as far as different demands of the child or different demands on the other people in the classroom, or sorry, in the home. And so we want to, again, ask the question so you can be really understanding what is happening in the home. And the other, as what Robin was saying, the best place to focus on is engagement, independence, and social relationships. And use the tools that we have available for you. We'll review the website where you can find a lot of materials, and Robin is going to speak to a really great tool called the Measurement of Independence, Social Relationships, Engagement, Independence, and Social Relationships, and use that tool because it was really helpful for you to dig deep within routines of the day. And then the other question that's always really great to ask if you are not quite getting a sense of what is going on in this routine that is, or this time of day that's challenging for the child or the family, maybe ask the question, what would you like this time to look like in 6 months? Or what would you like the child to be doing in 6 months? Again, we're really thinking about how is the family and the child functioning in that time of day. And you have to know child development to be able to ask quality, relevant questions. So it doesn't seem like we don't have things to offer, but we actually know what's going to be next. So we can be encouraging families to know what the next steps in development are and not shooting too high or too low for what's next.
Yes, and so when Cammie's talking about knowing what the child would be doing next, she is talking about what the child would be doing next in that routine, the functional skills that a child acquires in that routine, not just on a developmental checklist or something like that. So that does lead to this great tool to help with needs assessment, and that is the MISER, the Measure of Engagement, Independence, and Social Relationships, which Cammie just mentioned. This manual and set of forms has recently been published by Brooks, who has helped organize this webinar, I think. And so the MISER set includes the manual and the forms. As I mentioned, there are 5 per package. And this is what the MISER looks like. This happens to be the very beginning of it. So this is waking up, usually the first routine. It's routine number 1. And the skills, the functional skills, are arrayed in the order of the chronological order of the age order in which that skill typically begins. And families score it on not yet, sometimes, or used to, or often, or beyond this. Often or beyond this is number 3. So 3 is mastery, and then 1 is child isn't doing it yet. And so this happens to show how you use basal and ceiling so that families don't have to answer all, I don't know, something like 400 skills that are listed in the MISER. They can just answer the skills around the child's age or chronological age or expected developmental age. And it's very useful. Oh yeah, here let me just go back. Sorry, this is not. It is very useful for preparing for the routines-based conversation because it is organized by routines and has functional skills in it. So this is something that you can find at brookspublishing.com/MISER. I'm very concerned right now that early intervention and early childhood special education might have come to a standstill in terms of letting children into services because their previous or usual methods of determining eligibility are no longer possible because professionals can't put their hands on them to test them. And I think that temporarily or permanently, if we're lucky, we should base eligibility on functional and family needs. And that would actually be a really good thing for early intervention anyway. Early intervention, birth through 5, I'm talking about. And so we could use the RBI and a routines-based conversation, or the MISER to figure out who should receive early intervention. So join me in this advocacy effort that if it's going to be called early intervention or early childhood special education, we shouldn't make people wait, because who knows how long this is going to go on. So from the RBI, or routines-based conversation, we're going to get 3 kinds of goals: child goals, child-related family goals, and family-level goals. When we have child goals, the way we write them in this model, and you've heard me talk about participation-based goals before, is it would look like this. Dolores will participate in breakfast, playtime, and dressing time by naming colors correctly. So the issue that the family wanted is, they probably said, I wanted to know her colors. You have to change that to naming colors to make it behavioral and observable. And this came up as a need or a skill that would be really useful at breakfast time, playtime, and dressing time in this family's life. Now, so that is the goal statement, and all goal statements begin with the child's name will participate in, and then the routines in question. That's why they're called participation-based goals, emphasizing the importance of participation. And there's the skill at the end of the goal statement. Then we have methods to measure all of these, and these participation-based goals. We will know she can do this when she correctly names the color of 3 differently colored objects. So there's the acquisition criterion. At breakfast, 1 playtime and dressing time. That's the generalization criterion. In 1 day for 4 consecutive days, and that's the maintenance criterion. Once you get used to writing these goals this way, you know, it becomes very easy to come up with these 3 kinds of criteria for each goal. And remember, this started off with maybe just our informal notes just said naming colors correctly. So those 3 words ended up being, we have enough information or can guess what these criteria might be, and then check it out with the family or do it with the family. Let me just move faster ahead here. There are 3 kinds of criteria. No, let me start again. There are 3 types of criteria: acquisition, generalization, and maintenance. Within acquisition, there are 4 types of the acquisition criterion. The number of times or the number of things that a child does, we call that frequency. How long a child does, sits in a chair for 10 minutes, for example. Distance, so this would be mobility criterion, and volume. By volume, we mean how much, like for an eating goal or a drinking goal. Here is a pretty good example of goals that were selected this is done in a real RBI, and you can see that the most important one for Paula was for her child, Henry, to use 2-word phrases, and this is at dressing time, car time, going out time, dinner time. Second was participating with the family, cooking, playing, and eating, and so forth. And I'm going to show you this and how all of these skills then get translated to a matrix in a minute. So when you show the family the goals, I think I've covered this already, you can share your screen, insert order. If by phone, from time to time, read what family has so far. Because you know, once you're down the list, the family might not remember if they can't see it. So that's why you read, okay, so far you've got this, 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 and this, and remind them. Cami, I realize I skipped over a kind of an important question, which is when I was talking about the importance of letting children into early intervention, what are some of the challenges that you've heard about for the system for letting kids in or not during this shutdown mode?
I think the biggest challenge we're hearing is the need for standardized testing. As you had mentioned, some professionals are saying that they can't do assessments without a full-on standardized test or observation. So those are the challenges, and I completely agree. We should not be waiting for a perfect scenario, as we know this might last us a while. And so just continue to encourage our states and agencies to use the MISER or the RBC or I and to use that clinical judgment and not to delay services.
Good, thank you. Oops, this one. One possibility is that you can write the goals straight onto a matrix. So I'll show you the matrix in just a second. You insert the routines for each child goal. And the only disadvantage of doing this is that the order that you had the goals was the order that the family happened to mention them, so it wouldn't be in the priority order. So here is that same set of goals that I told you about, just put on a matrix. So here's the short part of it, the by blanking part, basically by using two-word phrases. And here are the routines for that, for each of these child goals. You'll notice that some do not have any X's in the cells, and those are family goals, because family goals are not usually related to routines. So to summarize then, the routines-based conversation consists of an eco map, the routines-based conversation itself when we go through the routines, the decisions about child and family goals or outcomes by the family, and then putting it onto a matrix. Let me just check this. Cami, when can a person develop a matrix?
It's a great question. As the parent is putting the short-term or the short version of the outcomes in a priority order, you could be jotting those down on your matrix, or some people just wait until they get back to the office and put it on a matrix there when they're writing up them into full participation-based goals. But it is really important to fill out before your first visit with the family, as it is one of the most important pieces of paper to bring into your first home visit, as well as the other two are the eco map and then the next steps form, which is available on the website.
The next steps form that you take on that very first visit, you need it because you're going to complete it for the next visit. But from that point onwards, the next step form has what the family was working on and what they want the focus to be. So the matrix is a really great way to get going with that conversation with the family about which of these. We ask them what they want to talk about, but we can also ask them, well, here are the goals that you selected. What would you like to talk about today? Good, thank you. So the resources from what we've fondly called the RBM Enterprise is eieio.ua.edu. And at this website, you'll see a materials page. And that has a whole bunch of materials in various languages. So feel free to, and they're all free, or we give indication if it's if it's something that's published by a commercial publisher, then we don't obviously distribute it for free. But the 90% of our materials are, or more, are freely available through that website. Please write to us at eieio@ua.edu. And we read all of those, and the appropriate person on the team will respond to the question. You also might find it interesting to go to naturalenvironments.blogspot.com. And for those of you working with preschoolers, don't worry, this isn't just about infant toddler stuff, it's about birth through 5. And a recent blog post was about teleintervention. It's actually had a lot of hits, and so you might go to this site and find that recent post. Google YouTube McWilliam, and then when you get into YouTube, search for Robin McWilliam, and you'll find all kinds of embarrassing clips and videos and things. But it is another resource that who does anything without YouTube nowadays? So Cami, I think we're about at our time limit, don't you think? Unmute.
Yeah, we need it.
Yeah. We recognize that this is a difficult time, and we really hope that this overview of the routines-based model offers people some ideas about how we can do a great job with families, even from a distance. What would you like to end with, Cami?
I'd like to end with, as we pointed out, there's little preparation that professionals need to do before their visits. And so this is a challenging time for all of us. So professionals, give yourself some self-compassion, let yourself off the hook, and follow the household, the parent and child's needs, instead of maybe thinking about coming up with a pre-created agenda. Let's just go forth and we can do this together.
Good, that's a good parting message. And so now, Megan or Jen, did you want to conclude this?
Yes, I will conclude it. Thank you so much for joining us today. We can't thank Robin and Cami enough for their expertise, their time, and their willingness to share all of this information. As Robin mentioned, the handout will have some resources, linked to the slides, linked to all of the great things they talked about today. Thank you everyone so much. Thank you to our partners at the Division for Early Childhood for helping us promote this webinar and get it set up and ready to go. And we wish you all the best of luck when working remotely during COVID-19.